Compliments of a season. It's great to be on the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The National Assembly took one day from their annual Christmas and New Year holiday to attend to some legislative matters, one of which is passing the 2023 Appropriation Bill. Parliament passed the 2023 Appropriation Bill of 21.83 trillion naira. Now, this is an increase of 1.32 trillion naira from the 20.51 trillion naira budget proposal of President Muhammadu Buhari. A quick breakdown of the bill shows that 6.6 trillion naira is for debt servicing, while 8.3 trillion naira will be utilized for recurrent expenditure and 5.9 trillion naira for capital expenditure. The National Assembly also passed the 2022 supplementary budget as requested by President Buhari. Federal lawmakers cut short their Christmas holiday to attend to some important legislations, one of which is the 2023 Appropriation Bill. First, lawmakers in the Senate and House of Representatives attended the request for the extension of the implementation of the 2022 budget from December 31st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. The extension is to ensure the implementation of key capital projects in the budget which are yet to be funded.
Mr. President, by this extension, I would want to appeal to you to invite the minister concerned, of course the Minister of Finance, so that in the extension and the releases that will follow, projects, constituency projects of senators should also be funded, so that we're not just approving the extension and then what we've put in the budget for our constituent is not reflected in the implementation. Otherwise, I think this is timely, and I urge our colleagues to support the extension so as to enable the implementation of the 2022 budget.
And the gruesome murder of the
Both chambers then passed the 2022 supplementary budget of 819.5 billion naira as requested by President Buhari. According to the president, the supplementary budget is to address food security following devastating floods across the country, as well as damages to road and water infrastructure.
The effects of the 2022 flood across the country and its attendant consequences on the roads, bridges, farmlands, and water sector necessitated the supplementary appropriation bill. MDS involved in the supplementary appropriation bill's requests are Foreign Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Foreign Minister of Works and Housing, Foreign Minister of Water Resources. The Appropriation Committee, having considered the detailed provisions of the bill, the contribution of the subcommittee, and general impact it makes in ameliorating the havoc caused by flood across the country.
The House of Representatives approves the supplementary budget.
Federal Capital Territory, 30 billion carried. Federal Minister of Water Resources, 15 billion 500 million carried. Thank you.
The Senate also approves and passes the supplementary budget. However, a federal lawmaker raises some concerns, but his colleague disagrees with his arguments.
Assuming we pass it today, we have 120 days to implement. No, 90 in the next year. But we have this, okay, it's 90 days. 90 days, Mr. President, for advertisement, for selection of contractors, and even if it's agreed that some of the projects are ongoing, let's agree that it is ongoing. That means that these monies will have to be spent within 90 days.
2023 budget, yes, is around the corner to be passed. But in the same vein, 2022 is still ongoing. And all that have happened in 2022. And if there are new sources to intervene on the plight of our people who have been involved in this perennial flooding, I think it will not be out of place. It shows how sensitive this government is. So we should not look at this budget from the point of 3 months of implementation, but rather that this is project that they can commence and it can extend even to next year. And we still have 2022 project that would dovetail into 2024.
As the Ninth Assembly passes its final appropriation bill, hopeful of maintaining the January to December budget cycle, the Senate President has a word for the executive arm.
I want to take this opportunity to urge the executive arm of government to implement the 2022 Appropriation Act. We have also passed the supplementary budget for 2022. We expect total implementation, no selective implementation.
The 2023 budget of 21.83 trillion naira passed by the National Assembly shows an increase of 1.32 trillion naira from the 20.51 trillion naira budget proposal of President Buhari in October this year. The recurrent expenditure is maintained at approximately 8.27 trillion naira. Capital expenditure increases from 5.35 to 5.9 trillion naira, while the debt servicing also increased from 6.31 to 6.6 trillion naira. Some key capital allocations include the Federal Ministry of Defense, 285 billion naira, Health, 134.9 billion naira, Power, 195.5 billion naira, and the Federal Ministry of Education, 153.7 billion naira. The House of Representatives had helped to resolve the 9-month strike by university lecturers earlier this year by making commitments to improve their welfare packages and make available revitalization funds to improve the infrastructure and operations of federal universities. The Tertiary Institutions Revitalization Fund of 300 billion naira has been captured in the 2023 appropriation bill. The 170 billion naira, which the House had promised to include in the budget to provide a level of increment in the welfare package of university lecturers, has also been captured, as well as 10.2 billion naira for the university's pension, including arrears. President Buhari has to sign the budget on or before December 31st, 2022, to maintain the January to December budget cycle reintroduced by the Ninth Assembly. There were tense moments during the Senate sitting on Wednesday, December 28th, over President Buhari's request for the upper chamber to approve 22.7 trillion naira collected by the federal government from the Central Bank of Nigeria. President Buhari had written to the Senate for the approval of restructuring of 22.7 trillion ways and means advances given to the federal government by the CBN within the last 10 years for emergency funding of delayed receipt of fiscal deficits. Now, some lawmakers opposed the request, arguing that it is unconstitutional.
Federal legislators take a day from the annual Christmas and New Year holiday to attend to some crucial legislations and functions before 2022 draws to a close. One of such is a request from President Muhammadu Buhari for the approval of restructuring of 22.7 trillion naira ways and means advances given to the federal government by the Central Bank of Nigeria within the last 10 years, in addition to 1 trillion naira to be collected as fresh domestic loan. The President, in a letter read by the Senate President Ahmed Lawan last Wednesday, explained that ways and means are advances from the Central Bank of Nigeria to the federal government for emergency funding of delayed receipts of fiscal deficits.
81 to 83.
However, a federal lawmaker is averse to this request from President Muhammadu Buhari.
Mr. President, Section 81-82 of the Nigerian Constitution, 81 to 83, states clearly how expenditure can be made by the government. One of it is through budgeting. The next is through supplementary budget as provided in the Constitution. Now, I don't know where the law comes from, where we have to spend money or restructure expenditures through ways and means.
Distinguished, excuse me, please, just let me say something. There is nothing before the Senate now. There is nothing. Technically, the report needs to be presented, and then you can raise your issue.
Mr. President, the report cannot be presented because we have no laws in the land of Nigeria that covers anything called weight.
No, why the report should be presented is for us to know what happened.
Senator Apiafi is unhappy at the progression of events, and raised voices fill the air, mostly from opposition senators who are against the report.
Listen. Yes.
You have to sit down. Your opposition.
Chairman of the Senate Committee on Finance attempts to present the report, but lawmakers once again raise their voices.
Please allow him to land. Allow him to land, please.
Efforts by the Senate President to make his colleagues back down is unsuccessful, prompting him to call for a closed-door session to resolve the matter. Nearly an hour later, the private session ends and Senate announces its resolutions on the Ways and Means request.
That the restructuring of 22,719 billion of Ways and Means be stepped down for further legislative action.
The Senate President sets up a special committee to summon the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, the Central Bank Governor, and heads of other relevant agencies to provide details on approvals and expenditure made from the 22.7 trillion naira. Meanwhile, the Senate passes the Finance Bill, which proposes key reforms to specific taxation, customs, excise, and fiscal laws through the amendment of several tax laws. The list of acts to be amended in the Finance Bill include the Capital Gains Tax Act, the Companies Income Tax Act, Personal Income Tax Act, Petroleum Profits Tax Act, Stamp Duties Act, Value Added Tax, Public Procurement Act, Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act, as well as Customs, Excise and Tariff Act. Sponsors of the bill say it is intended to enhance tax equity by bringing more economic sectors into the tax net and ensuring a fairer distribution of revenue receipts to all tiers of government. However, a member of the House, Honorable Mafiok Luke, raises concerns that certain amendments in the Finance Bill will not address the hardship faced by Nigerians.
The Finance Bill has to do with the macroeconomic policies for 2023. And then that is going to affect the lives of Nigerians. Already, the economy and the situation from globally to nationally has affected the lives of poor Nigerians. And so any action we are going to take to lay a foundation for government expenditure for 2023 should consider leveraging and then mitigating the hardship that Nigerians are facing, not to act in a way that will increase that hardship, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill here seeks to make amendment, just like the DS has said, to certain provisions of very statutory legislations. Mr. Chairman, for example, clauses 19 through 26 is making very fundamental amendment to the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act. This is an act that stands the test of time, and we are using a piece of legislation that is going to last only for a year to make critical amendment to a piece of legislation that has been over time. Mr. Speaker, sir, clause 2829 has made provisions or made allusion to petroleum profit tax as against the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act, which has come to take as an umbrella of pre-existing legislations that has to do with the petroleum industry.
Nevertheless, the House of Representatives passes the Finance Bill.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. Before the break, we saw the Senate reject the request by President Buhari to restructure the 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means advances collected by the federal government from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, the lawmakers rejected the request after an uproar in the Senate over the issue. We spoke to one of the senators who was against this request, Senator Betty Apiafi, to understand her position.
The Central Bank Act is very clear about domestic borrowings. Section 34 of the, I think it's 34, yeah? 38 of the Central Bank Act states clearly that if for any reason the government cannot fund the Appropriation Act, the government can borrow from domestic stock. And the only way they can borrow is through central bank. But the government cannot borrow more than 5% of the previous year's revenue. So if in 2022, the Nigerian government wants to borrow from the domestic, internally, then they cannot borrow more than the revenue of 2021. And in 2021, the Nigerian government revenue was 4.39 trillion. And so if the Nigerian government is to borrow 5% of this amount, they can borrow more than 2.95 billion. They can't. And again, if you now try to look at what they want to do through ways and means, it means that government is going to be borrowing in excess of 130% of the provisions of the CBN Act. That is one. Now, the CBN Act goes further to say, if government borrows from domestic borrowings, it must pay back. If the executive feel that we are so, that the law gives them the powers to spend 23 trillion or 22 point something trillion, because 871 billion of it was for the supplementary budget they're bringing, then why bring it to us? Go ahead, spend it. And so Nigerians will face you. My name will never be part of that. The entire debt stock of Nigeria is about 20 trillion. Then in one transaction, you want to add another 20 trillion. You listen to the budget presentation today. Our loan repayment has hit 8 point something trillion. Now double it. You're going to be doing like 16 trillion. What is our revenue? You have the paper. What's federal government revenue? And we're saying this thing over and over again. We are still talking about oil production at 1,600. We haven't even reached 2,000, in spite of all the noise we've heard about oil theft. If you want to spend money, then go and make the money. Go and improve on your revenue. Not coming to increase tax like they've done again. Go and increase your revenue, and your easiest way to increase your revenue is oil.
Let's take a look at more major activities in the National Assembly during the week.
The Senate has asked the Central Bank of Nigeria to extend the deadline for the use of the old Naira note from January 31st to June 30th, 2023. The Senate made this request during its sitting on Wednesday, December 28, after a federal lawmaker, Senator Ali Ndume, in a motion, raised an alarm that the January 31st deadline for the use of the old Naira notes is too close for residents in Borno and Yobe states to comply with. He explained that there are not enough commercial banks in the two states, which is making it difficult for residents to comply with the directive in time to beat the deadline. In November 8, 2022, the CBN said it had finalized arrangements for the new currency to begin circulation from December 15, 2022, after its launch by President Muhammadu Buhari. This is after the redesigning of the 200 Naira, 500 Naira and 1,000 Naira banknotes. The Apex Bank explained that the new and existing currencies shall remain legal tender and circulate until January 31st, 2023, when the existing currencies shall cease to be legal tender.
Aware that some Nigerians are already envisaging rush and long queues in the banking hall across the country as a result of people trying to get access to the new Naira note, which was unveiled last month by Mr. President at a brief ceremony in the State House. Aware also that the old notes are expected to be in circulation along the new ones until January 31st, when the old notes are expected to be phased out. It is expected that many Nigerian businesses will start to reject the old notes as soon as the banks started paying out redesigned notes to customers. Convinced that if the withdrawal of old notes from circulation is not extended beyond 31st, many Nigerians will be thrown into hardship, and to avoid the repeat of 1984 experience withdrawal of old notes, accordingly resolved to urge the central bank to urgently extend the withdrawal date from 31st January to 31st June 2023.
The Senate then approved the extension of the deadline.
The Senate urges the Central Bank of Nigeria to urgently extend the withdrawal date from 31st January to June 31st, 2023. Say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
Speaking to journalists after plenary, Senator Ndume sheds more light on the reason behind his motion.
It's a good idea. So I'm not saying the idea of having a better Nigerian note is not good. I'm in support of it. But the timing is not right. Nigerians, as I said, don't have banking facilities everywhere. I said it before, and I'm repeating it now because time is getting closer. For example, in Borno and Yobe, I'm using that example because that is where I come from. And you could hear from the Senate that time when I say, in my state, we don't have enough banking facilities to, for effective implementation of that order. We have 27 local government. You find banks, and I think in only 5 functional banks in 5 to 6 local government in my state. And we are known for trading, going from market to buy cash crops and all that. And there are no bank there. Nobody will, and there is no POS even in these areas. Some of these areas that don't even have network, and they have a lot of money out there. I've never seen the 500. I've never seen the 200. That is senator. Talk less of a person in the. And I was at home. I've been withdrawing money from the bank, cash. All this cash that I have been withdrawing to address my daily, the banks didn't give me new notes. So it means the new notes are even in short supply.
A member of the House of Representatives representing Sagbama Ekeremo Federal Constituency of Bayelsa State, Honorable Frederick Agbedi, is backing the resolution of the Senate that the Atala marginal field be restored to the state government. Representative Agbedi, who is also the leader of the Bayelsa caucus in the House of Representatives, is calling for quick implementation of the resolution and prosecution of the oil company operating the marginal field for fraudulent activities.
All the issues canvassed as to purchase, as to sales, and as to ownership by the new company, Atkins Oil, were fraudulent, were not true. And so the Senate resolved that the oil block should be restored back to Bayelsa State government. And of course, as a representative of where the oil block is found, where the oil block is located, it is important that I stand on behalf of the people to appreciate what the legislature has done, as well as what the executive has done, and to further urge that this process should be completed.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has started an investigative hearing into the alleged loss of over $2.4 billion revenue accrued from illegal sale of 48 million barrels of crude oil export in 2015, as well as crude oil export from 2014 till date. Speaking at the inauguration of the investigative hearing in Abuja, Honorable Mark Bila assured all whistleblowers of the committee's resolve to ensure confidentiality of all the information provided, as well as recovery of the revenue.
The salient issue of a whistleblower in 2020 who raised allegations that certain individuals at the time in government and some allegedly still serving conspired to sell 48 million barrels of Nigeria's crude, which resulted in the country's loss of over $2.4 billion. So it is important to point out the fact that our job, in line with our constitutional mandate in section 88 and 89, is to investigate. And with regards to the occurrence of this issue, it only came to the fore, like several other issues, several years later. Even though the matter occurred in 2015, it was only brought to the fore by a whistleblower towards the end of 2020. And remember, that was the COVID period.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us, and compliments of the season.